Hello. Thank you all for coming to this webinar. My name is Brian Kellerman. I am the Chief Quality and Food Safety Officer for Kellerman Consulting, and Kellerman Consulting is a food safety and quality consulting firm. Some of you I see attending know us, some may not. We're putting this on with Wherefore, which is an ERP software company, and we're going to use a little bit of we're going to use some of or a lot of their software as some of our discussion today. So the purpose of this webinar is going to be about audit preparedness and audit readiness. So we're going to cover some of the key issues that come up in preparing for audits. Now, for those of you who noticed, the format here is Ask the Expert. So as I do when I'm going to hang out with any of my friends, I try to bring enough material for the entirety of the conversation, which in this case is going to be an hour. However, if any folks have questions specifically about your audits or issues that have come up with auditors, if you use that chat function, I will gladly stop at any point of this audit and really focus on answering those questions. A lot of times those are really crucial conversation starters and really are great ways to talk about some of these really nuanced issues. I do want to make sure we get to our example using Wherefore. So that may be one thing I push us towards, but the more questions show up in the chat, the more we can talk about those specific issues. With that said, I want to get right into it. So as I mentioned, the purpose of this webinar is to talk about getting ready for an audit. And really, there was a thing I read many years ago about, it was like a golf book. I think Harvey, I can't remember his last name, Picard, something like that. And it was a little red golf book. And he mentioned that in golf, and I'm not a golfer, I have to say that, but for those people who go do that, your swing is screwed up before you start. His point was the way you set yourself up, the way that you approach it, that's where the mistakes happen. Certainly audits are very much the same way. The audit is damaged prior to the auditor showing up. And so what we want to talk about is how do you get ready for an audit? Some of you folks here may have experience with audits. Some may have some coming up for the first time and may have questions. We're going to try to get into advanced stuff about it. That's hopefully very helpful. So the very first thing that we want to talk about when it comes to audit preparation, and I know this is going to sound a little bit silly, but for everyone here, beginner to advanced, the first thing you need to know is what is the audit standard. If you're a GFSI audited company, so if you're SQF, BRC, FSSC, there is a manual that you need to have in order to understand how that audit goes. When folks have a very poor audit, one of the easiest ways to screw up an audit is to not know what those books are. When it comes to second-party audits, customer audits, when it comes to government regulatory inspections, oftentimes those are extremely frustrating because we don't know what the questions are going to be about. If a customer is going to audit you, the first question that you should ask that company, whether they're a beloved supplier or a new one or anything in between, or you have trouble with them, they need to provide you something in writing that tells you what they are going to audit against, an audit checklist, a manual, something. And if they don't do that, that is a red flag. And you should be very concerned about letting anyone into your facility that doesn't provide you an advanced understanding of what the standards are that they're going to audit you for and what is right or wrong in that audit book. So with that in mind, I put a couple questions up here. One of them is, what does an auditor decide to ask for? And for any of you who have been in an audit, you know that it is a kind of a high stakes, high stress situation. And the way that an auditor thinks through asking for documentation is to really assess you as the person being audited and the company as far as preparedness. And that's when we're going to get into how to properly be prepared. But what an auditor can do is mix things up randomly, and that's always the highest risk in an audit is an auditor just asking for random dates or random months. we do need to be prepared with our documentation for an auditor who may ask for something from last November and say, give me November 4th, pull your records from that day. That obviously makes things quite difficult because that means we need to go back through whatever audit period. If it's a new audit, that might be 90 days or 60 days of records. If it's a recertification audit, that may be the whole year. So we want to make sure that our records are up to date. And as we know, for anyone who's preparing for audits, time gets away from us sometimes, and getting those last bits of preparation can be very difficult. An auditor who is asking for random documents is being very difficult. So that's the first thing you should know. And one of the things we're going to touch on during this discussion is, if you as a person being audited, if you're the auditee and you have examples ready to show an auditor, you're allowed to do that. This is something that we really emphasize with our clients. If you are ready to show something to an auditor, that evidence that you show has to be considered by the auditor. An auditor who is really going to allow that to drive the audit will accept what you are showing them if it is the correct documentation for what they're asking for. You having it ready is a huge advantage to you. And it is only auditors who are trying to be very difficult that may ask for randomized documentation. And the last bits of audit preparation really address those like randomized questions. That's high risk. Those are things you always have to sort of allow for as a possibility, even if it's relatively unlikely. So what records do I show the auditor? Okay, well, that obviously, again, is why I mentioned at the beginning, you need to have the audit book. You should not be guessing what your records are. If you have an audit coming up, if you are thinking about getting audited, getting a GMP or a GFSI audit, and you think, gosh, I wonder how you set this up, there should be no guessing. This golf example I used, the setting up of your swing being where things get screwed up. If you are preparing for an audit and you are confused as to what you might be requested, that means you are not fully prepared for that audit. Go back to that manual, start to look through the rules, understand what is going to be asked for in the specific order of the audit book. Auditors do not have to follow the audit book. However, almost all do. So when you have an audit book and you are ready and you've read it and you have set everything up to match that audit book, you're showing the auditor that you are ready for that audit. And so what happens when we know we have certain records that may not be complete? We had an employee out for a day and they forgot to do the new task for a GMP program or a GFSI program, or a supplier who is just not willing to send the documentation. Well, as I say, if you are prepared for that audit, you're not going to lead with documentation that you're having trouble with. And this is one of the key points that we're going to talk about as we get into the next slide. The auditors in an audit are looking for signs of conformance to the rule book, which I'm going to be a broken record about it. Knowing what the rule book is so crucial, because the auditor needs to see that you folks are following the rules as are written in that rule book. So you know what the rule is. If you need to have supplier documentation ready, you should have examples of suppliers who are being good suppliers and who have had documentation requested and who have actually sent those documents. So with that big picture in mind, as we go into, and again, I mentioned it here as well, you need to have your standard ready, which is again the audit manual. And we're going to switch over and look at an audit manual for a moment. But then the most important thing for preparation is having a cheat sheet ready to go. What we call a cheat sheet, a prep sheet. Eric has joined. Yes, this will be recorded. So this will be available in its entirety after the audit. And I'll let my wife Phoebe and Jeff from Wherefore will take care of that. So when we talk about having an audit cheat sheet or a prep sheet, I want to show you what I'm talking about. So I'm going to share my screen here, and I'm going to start with the SQF manual. The reason I'm using the SQF manual here is not because I expect everyone to get SQF certified here, but SQF allows anyone to download this at no cost. So I am comfortable that sharing this information is not something that SQF would be concerned about. With things like ISO 22000, which is FSSC, or ISO 9001, you pay for those books, and I do not feel comfortable sharing that without consent from those organizations. I believe SQF is going to be fine with us showing this because you can go download this. So this is download from SQF's website. Sorry, let me go back up. This is the SQF Food Safety Code for Food Manufacturers. This is the current edition, edition 9. This is the rule book. So if I'm getting ready for an SQF audit, when I have clients getting ready for SQF audits, they need to download this book. Now, I will tell you that in the GFSI, in every GFSI scheme, one of the main rules is that you will have the book and it's going to be correct. So you have to download this book and you have to have it ready. If you don't have it ready in a GFSI audit, if you're going through BRCGS audit and you don't have the BRCGS book, that's a major nonconformance. You've already demonstrated to the auditor that you don't know how the audit works. You're going to get a very poor score or probably fail. Those questions come up right at the beginning. So they find out if you don't have the book quickly. As we look at the SQF book, and I don't know if those of you here have, we have the actual rules, and that starts on page 36 of the book. We go through rules. They are each and every individual sentence is what the auditor is asking about, and they need to see evidence against it. And again, those of you who are experienced in SQF audits, maybe this is causing some kind of flashback or something bad, but hopefully not. Hopefully it just sounds about right. I am moving us down to environmental monitoring because I want to look at these rules real quick. We're not going to read them all now, but I want to show you my cheat sheet, and we're going to go through what a cheat sheet is. And we're also going to look at how we prepare those. So what I have is another document that I'm going to share, which is our SQF checklist. Now, this is another document that SQF offers to anyone that's going to go through SQF audit. You download the checklist. It is the exact same as that rule book. It is just in the form of a spreadsheet that you can enter information into. So I'm going to go down to that same section, environmental monitoring, and what I've done with our version of this cheat sheet, I entered one extra column so we can add a few extra documents, but I am at environmental monitoring, which I just showed you in the rule book. What we're going to look at very quickly here is how do we prepare for the audit? How do we use this cheat sheet for the audit? And I'm going to tell you now that this is the most important part of properly preparing for an audit. Having the rules in order, having a document. Now, what I'm showing you here is how to hyperlink into this document. Not everyone loves to do that. However, for those folks who are comfortable with a process of going through the rules and linking into a document, the auditor is going to appreciate it if you do that. That is not cheating. It is not something that is outside of the bounds. In fact, the auditors really appreciate it. We ask all of our clients to have something like this or equivalent to it. We have developed ours for other GFSI and GMP audit schemes. Not every book has something like this. This is what SQF does for all people who go through their audits. Other schemes have different standards, so we will manufacture them where our clients are subscribed and have purchased the right books for their audits. And you might be asking, if this is what I give to our clients, why am I sharing this to you now? Well, I will tell you that in the triangle of quality for Kellerman Consulting, we have money, we have speed, and humor. If you hire us, if you hire me, I'm much funnier. And I may also go faster depending on what else I have going on. But other than that, this is what we have our clients do here. This is the main thing. So this, as we have had our clients do this, the scores have gone up tremendously. It is so helpful. The auditors are so happy that you have the right information in the right order. So let's look quickly at what we have here. So I have the rule, the first sentence or the first couple sentences of environmental monitoring. I have hyperlinked a document. This is a templated document. It does not have any information on it, but you can see that it even pops up in our Google Drive. I also have an environmental monitoring policy, a risk assessment to go along with it. So I have two documents that we can click on and they will pop up. I don't know if you can see that in the share, but they pop up so that you can present them to the auditor. I'm going to actually add one more document here so you can see how I do that. I'm going to go down to this 2483, go into the square. I'm going to go into my list of documents, and I'm going to pull up our trend analysis document. So with our trend analysis document, I'm actually going to copy the name of our document and copy it right into this grid. I'm going to wrap it. Then, for those of you who are relatively good with computers, I'm going to hit the hyperlink button, which is for an Apple computer, Command K. I believe it's similar in a Mac. You see that they have a link that is pasted. I'm going to go back to my document. All I have to do is go get the address for the document. I do want to say that in this case, all of the documents are on a shared drive. So if you have Dropbox, or if you have Google Drive or Microsoft Teams, I think that's it. Microsoft One, I can't remember what they call it. You can do the same thing. I uploaded this checklist. I have uploaded the documents. And so when I link them, and you can see here that I successfully linked it by taking the name, adding the hyperlink, and the document is now hyperlinked into this cheat sheet. So when I have my clients, now granted for us, we will go through and look at our documents and perform some of that function with our clients. But one way or the other, this is something that any of you can do on your own. I have someone who can report that they got a 95 with 5 weeks to prepare for an audit. Rachel says nice things about me. I don't want to share it, but thank you, Rachel. I really appreciate it. Our system has been very effective. I do think it's a very manageable thing for folks to utilize in their system. So something like this, it is that easy. Getting these documentation, reading the rules, and lining them up, it is so important. So we have Wenjon has said OneDrive is the Microsoft equivalent. Thank you for pointing that out. So as we are looking at these principles, the idea of I'm going to get the book, I'm going to line up the rules, I'm going to put in order the policies, procedures, records. Now, granted, if you do not have your policies, procedures, and records, you are not prepared for your audit, no matter what fancy system you use, no matter how many cheat sheets you have, that will not solve it. So if you are going to prepare for an audit, obviously you need to do an internal audit. You need to do a full assessment of your program and make sure you have actually followed the rules for whatever audit scheme that you are looking at. But if you have already gone through the implementation process, your policies, procedures are there, or if you've inherited a system, if you are going through recertification audit and you know, hey, we got an A last year, so I know that my program passed, but I want to line up and understand what I'm going to be showing in order. You really can excel into a situation where you build really good rapport with the auditor, you're giving them what they want, and you're doing it in a way that makes their job easier. So with that said, I want to talk about using software, and this is where we're going to jump into the Wherefore software and talk about presenting records, and specifically use an example in their software to further buttress the documents we're going to show and in what order. Now, when it comes to your ability to export documentation from your ERP system, such as Wherefore, that's going to be crucial to work that out prior to the audit. Download or at least, whether you export, whether you do links to the software, that will be something that you're going to want to tweak before you start. I am in the Wherefore software in the ERP system now. So this is what you can see. So what I've put together is a work order and a scenario that is going to touch upon several rules that show up in an audit, whether it's GMP or a GFSI audit. And in this case, I have a scenario surrounding the making of zucchini bread. So I want to look at this. This was something that in our example would have occurred yesterday. And so we are going to look at a delivery date of tomorrow for a work order done yesterday. I have a scenario here. The most important piece of this scenario, and I'm going to explain it, but the record keeping we have in the Wherefore software is going to match up with the information we need to present to the auditor. So we have our SOPs, we have our policies, training records, things of that nature that are going to be presented in audit, but we also need to show records that prove what it is that we've done to the auditor. And I'm going to quickly say, as we go into this, records are all the auditor is going to assess. Those of you who have been through painful audits because the auditor has asked you how you do things, and you say, well, we verbally do this, or I told someone in the back that they need to wash their hands better, or I told them to move things up to the line and they didn't listen. The auditor gives you no credit. Auditors cannot assess verbal instructions. If you say something happened, it's not accessible to an auditor. And of course, you've probably heard, if it's not written down, it didn't happen. Well, in an audit, when we think about preparation, this is something that's absolutely crucial. And so something like Wherefore software is absolutely essential for those record keeping. If you're not a computer person, handwritten or typed out records are equivalent. In this case, we have a situation. The scenario here is that we made zucchini bread. It was rejected by a customer, or partially rejected by a customer, and it needed to be remade. In the Wherefore software, which I really like, I can have this message up for the production instructions. Zucchini bread, 80 loaves, rejected by a client for inconsistent quality. 24 loaves were kept by the client, 56 coming back. And so we're going to remake 60 loaves and reship it. So that is the scenario, and I am going to present that to the auditor. I can actually go ahead. I've actually linked a document here, which is the customer complaint form. I'm going to click on it. It exports it. So I have it real quick. I'm going to go out of the share here and go into that customer complaint document just so you folks can see what that document looks like. So here's my customer complaint that was downloaded from the software. This is very Grateful Dead heavy for those of you who like references. I'm a big Deadhead. So for those of you who know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. All right. So in this customer complaint form, I have it prepared as the preparer. We have, should say 3.7 was my example. But we have a complaint here that the person, Jay Straw, received the complaint from our customer, the Wichita retailers. And when we accepted this response, we do have matching quantities, a matching example here. So as you think about it in the audit, if I have prepared properly, I have my customer complaint form that has a message. We've managed the customer complaint. We have managed how we're going to deal with production instructions and what the outcome of the complaint is. In this case, a replacement order is being done. That's as long as the customer accepts that, we have a proper customer complaint. So as we go back into the Wherefore software, let me go get back into this. So that would be something I can download and show the auditor directly from the Wherefore site. I have lot code for traceability, my batch number, I have the work order date and the delivery date. Again, my production instructions. I have the number of loaves here that we have made. And so I have the production records, which is something that Wherefore does, which is really great. If I needed to revise it, I would be able to do that. And then show the auditor any kind of revision. With this information, I now have applicable records for how we handle customer complaints. We could do a traceability exercise and demonstrate that we're capable of carrying through our FIFO inventory control through the remaking of product for an order. In this scenario, when we think about it, since we're remaking bread, we're not necessarily doing rework taking the bread and actually just changing it a little bit. In this case, we are making a new order. And so what that would cause in an audit is a situation where we need to show the auditor, hey, we brought in this much ingredients. We had an order from a customer, but because we rejected it, we can show you where that was backed out of inventory. We've replaced it with a newer lot. And we would make sure from a FIFO standpoint that that lot shipped before any later bread was shipped to that customer. So now we have a new FIFO marker here to make sure we're following first in, first out principles, or first expired, first out, depending on how you work it. Now, one of the things that I wrote in the customer complaint, and I want to make sure that we also touch here, is that the bread, when it comes back, in the example I used here, we had insufficient quality, not bread that was dangerous. It was not a recall. It would have been a market withdrawal. Customers said, hey, this bread isn't big enough, or it doesn't have enough sunflower seeds on it. Our customers don't want this. You can bring that bread back, and a further corrective action here may be reselling it to someone who will accept quality for that bread. So even though we have brought it back, we have a situation where we're going to remake the bread, and we're going to fulfill that order with a later order. But we also have this inventory that may be usable and may be sellable. So in that case, for issues of inventory control, for diverting of inventory to another client as a corrective action, those things can be prepared for the auditor ahead of time. And I'm going, and in doing that, we can demonstrate at that point of the audit that we are capable of keeping track of those things when they happen, and that's crucial. I have Rachel asked a question here that she had an auditor tell a company that rework isn't considered rework if it never left the facility. Is that true? And if so, can you explain? Yes, I can, and that's a wonderful question. So let me jump into that. So Rachel's question is like, what is rework? Which I get all the time. Now, I don't want to contradict this auditor in case the auditor listens to this recording sometime in the future. However, I would argue that that's not a great definition. Not leaving the facility is not where I divide the line. However, I know what the auditor is trying to say here. In our example, Rachel, we are not contradicting that, because we said in this example, the loaves of bread left the facility, were rejected by the customer, and then brought back. So that would be something where you could call it rework. If you wanted to make croutons out of that bread, you could use that bread. And that would be rework, and it had left the facility. Now, where is the actual dividing line for rework, though? The dividing line for rework is where a lot code has been issued. Generally speaking, it's going to be on packaging, and then the product has to be brought into the system with a lot code, and the lot code's going to have to change. So the most important piece with lot coding or with rework is, do I have to go back into my inventory control? In this case with Wherefore, this is where this type of software or an ERP system is so valuable, is that they have lot coding information. Well, if I sent out loaves of bread, bring them back, because they are insufficient for what my customer wanted, and I'm going to rebake them as croutons, dry them out, or I'm going to add them to a new product. I'll make muffins out of it or something if that's possible. I have an inventory problem because I ordered certain amounts of ingredients and raw materials. I brought them into the system. I made them into something that has been associated with a lot. Now I'm taking the finished product and I'm bringing it back into my system. If I don't have proper record keeping for that rework, if I don't say, hey, lot 1001 was brought back into the system and is now lot 1003 and it's croutons, when we go do a traceability exercise, we're going to fail because the ingredients are not going to match finished product. So when we think about rework and when we think about what is so important about rework, it's always about the fact that I have to keep track of my inventory from the start to the end. And if at the end it comes back around, then that has to be accounted for. So where this auditor said, hey, if it didn't leave the facility, it's not rework, If it went to finished product storage, if it was in boxes in your facility and it had a lot code on it, and I ripped the box back open, it doesn't matter if it left the facility or not. That's going to be rework. Where folks get really confused is a lot of times in production processes, you start to make something and it doesn't get made right, or it gets partially made right. It doesn't get to the right temperature. It doesn't have the right water activity or pH, and I'm going to pour some vinegar in it. That is not rework because I never assigned the finished lot code. I didn't package it yet. So where you're in between, that is not rework, and you're not done with the actual production of it. And if you think back to the ingredients and the materials, if I haven't slapped a lot code sticker on it, then my inventory is still going to match, even if I pour in a little more vinegar. I just have to change my batch records to say I added a little more vinegar to get the pH lower. Now, the last thing I want to say about rework, and this is so important in any audit as we're preparing for it. So again, with things, whether or not it leaves the facility, if we want that to be the dividing line, if we've issued a lot code and we're bringing it back into our system, one of the biggest concerns in an audit is going to be the allergen control, because rework oftentimes screws people up on allergens. And as we know, for FDA facilities, we have allergen preventive controls. Even if we have very tight controls, if I bring in zucchini bread and I throw it back in and there's wheat in it, and someone doesn't realize that we're making croutons that, generally speaking, our croutons are gluten-free or something like that, but we realize we could divert it and I put the wrong label on it, then through the rework process, I may have violated my allergen control program. That's a very, very common occurrence. So when we're, again, using Wherefore software, if I go back, the notes I might make here in the software, I think because this is finished, I cannot do instructions. But if I had a new work order and I wanted to put a note in it, I might write, hey, the allergen control needs to be extra check because I'm doing a rebake and there might be an allergen changeover in that. So that is a great question. Just to reiterate, it is when a lot code is assigned, that's where you start the clock on rework if you bring it back in. Well, needless to say, when you are preparing again for an audit, what I want you folks to be thinking about is, do I have records for each part of the process? Do I have my Wherefore software? Do I have my work orders that prove what I am looking for, or what the auditor is going to be looking for? So when we go back to our cheat sheet, I'm going to quickly go back to that. As we start to go down this process, especially for things like production, and I can go to here, we had the actual rework rules that we would be applying for the example we used for the Wherefore software. If I'm going to be looking at product release, which is the next section of this, there are all these rules for product release, and we're not going to read them all the way through. But if I have a product release program, if I am actually testing product before it ships, and so I have to hold it in my facility before it releases, and I have to do my pre-shipment review, I need to have those ready to go. As we talked about with the example I just gave of a customer complaint using the Wherefore software, I have all those records stored on the Wayfair, on their site and in the records for Wherefore. In the case of product release, that may be done separately of Wherefore software. And if that's the case, then I need to go and link to something that has been released, or I need to have a manila folder with my release records ready to go. So we talked about the randomized asking for documents. In an audit, the auditor can just say, I want to see release records for October. I want to see it for July. I want to see it for February. And now you're going to have to go back and pull those. Now, an auditor may choose to do that no matter what, but oftentimes what I see in audits are folks who are not prepared, who the auditor goes to the question, the next question, they do not know what the question is going to be because they have not read the book yet. And the auditor says, all right, I'm ready to see records, and they are not readily available. That is when the auditor will go to a randomized example. So as we think through audit preparation, when it comes to product release, if I have several months of product release or several weeks, several examples that are really good ones of where we release stuff, and I always beg clients, find the unusual stuff. Find where there was a problem. Find something where there was a corrective action or a nonconformance to go along with this. Because when you demonstrate that you found a situation, you found a problem, you corrected it on your terms, and you have a follow through corrective action, that's what an auditor needs to see in order to tell you you've done it correctly. And it is magic when you go through an audit with those things lined up properly. The auditor looks at what you have, they see that you know what they're looking for and you present it correctly. There may be some questions. The auditor may have grammatical issues with what you've put on. They may not agree with the decision you made. However, they will be very pleased with you for knowing what they need and for being able to provide it to them. So where you have unusual occurrences, nonconformances, or deviations, those are the situations you want to lead with. As a QA manager or as a director of a business or as an owner, when things don't go well, we often are, embarrassed or concerned about how that's going to look to an auditor. But you got it backwards. They love to see when stuff goes wrong because it's proving to them that you're a normal business. And for those of you who went to the corrective action webinar that we gave a few months ago, it was a similar message. We love to have corrective actions. When my clients have corrective actions and have nonconformances, I'm excited for them. We don't like it when things go wrong, but they are going to go wrong. And where you are ready to present those as part of the following of the rules in an audit, you're giving the auditor license to look at what went wrong in your facility, your thought process, your follow through, your corrective actions. And generally speaking, those are the best examples that you can provide to an auditor of what you're doing. To quickly go back to this product release and the idea of having it ready to go, if I am prepared for an audit, if I have my cheat sheet, if I have my policies, procedures ready to go, I have my Wherefore software with the records ready to go. If I'm presenting, hey, here's 5 examples, I picked one per month, pick a card, any card, Mr. or Miss Auditor, the auditor is able to maintain a level of randomness in what they're looking at. You have some control over what you're presenting to the auditor within reason. We have to maintain integrity. We have to be honest and forthcoming to the auditor. So we can't manipulate and hide things that are wrong. But if you have good examples or things you want to show the auditor, that is perfectly acceptable. And that's what you should be thinking about. What are the things I want to show the auditor, as opposed to, oh my gosh, what's the auditor going to ask for? Because again, if we're stuck on oh my goodness, what's the auditor going to ask for? Then you've already got a huge mistake. There's a rule book. There is an audit manual somewhere that tells the auditor how to do the audit. It's their responsibility to share it with you. And if they're not, then they are messing with you and they're doing something to make it unintentionally difficult to run an audit. So with these things compiled properly, you will almost certainly see your audit improve over time, your confidence level in an audit improve over time. And beyond that, it will help you understand when an auditor is being maybe fair or unfair. If you're going to have a personality conflict, it'll come out much earlier and you'll have a better understanding of how the audit goes, as opposed to just being startled and surprised and scared and all of the things that often happen with an audit when they are going poorly. So as we move towards the later stages of this webinar, I do want to open up the floor. Again, this is an Ask the Auditor. So I want to throw out there, if folks have any questions or if there's any specific examples that you would like to go over for an audit that you have recently been through, please type it into the chat so we can maybe talk about some more specifics if you have any. If not, I do want to quickly kind of review for you folks what exactly the mindset that an auditor has in an audit. So this is something where um, most folks are a little bit confused about what it is that auditors are trying to accomplish, why they behave the way that they do, what their mindset is. And it is frequently a huge disconnect when folks are going through audit, especially the first time. And I'm going to tell you folks now, for those of you who have either never been through an audit or have had a series of difficult audit experiences, most people go through audit thinking of the auditor as some kind of police officer or someone there to dock you points and to make things, to challenge you and make you upset. And that really is not what the auditor is there for. The auditor is there to, as I have indicated in this presentation, they're there to go through the rules and just assess whether or not you're following those rules. However, when an auditor cannot get that information, as they begin the audit, if they start to ask for things and you have to get up and walk out of the room to find information, if you have a confused look on your face, that communicates to an auditor a very, very important message. And the message is, I don't really know what we're doing here. And I cannot stress enough that that is what the auditor is really assessing beyond your records. When an audit is done correctly, it's actually pretty easy. It's not that big of a deal. And in fact, the expression I often use for clients is that audits become very frustrating when you do great on them because you spend so much time in the preparation. You spend so much time getting ready for each individual rule. And sometimes that can be many dozens of hours preparing for your sanitation program or preparing the documents for your supply chain approval program, only to find an auditor say, hey, show me your supply chain documents. And you have them ready and they look at it for like a minute. And oftentimes I find that to be amongst the most frustrating parts of audits, where I spent so much time doing something only to be told, yep, that's good, I don't care, on to the next thing. But as you can imagine, when you go through an audit and you go through section by section and you are being told, yes, this is fine, yes, this is fine, yes, this is fine, that is a way better outcome than getting into issues with auditors. Now, granted, I will say that Rachel in the chat has indicated that some auditors are jerks. And I want to expand on that, because Rachel is correct. Some auditors are not very nice. However, that is true of every profession in America and in the world. Some people are just jerks. There are larger power dynamics in professions. Some people in life really, really enjoy being powerful people and having it over somebody's head, that they control an interaction. That's true when you were a kid in school. Sometimes, there are teachers that are just jerks and teachers that are nice. Auditors are often the same things, even though auditors shouldn't be trying to be educators and they should not be teachers. They are nevertheless figures of authority. And when the audit starts, they're in charge. And there are auditors out there that, for whatever reason, whatever their motivations are, they really want to show you that they are smarter than you. And they want to show you that they know the rules better than you. Now, I will tell you that this audit preparation that we're speaking about really does, I have found, neutralize a lot of that. Even the auditors that are the most difficult, when you show them, hey, we're prepared, I have Wherefore software, I have all my records and I know where they are. That's something that an auditor, even the ones that really want to show you how smart they are, there's not much they can say when you know what's going on. The auditors that are jerks oftentimes are taking advantage of the fact that you as the auditee are confused, that it's going to be a lot harder for them to conduct the audit because it's going to make it difficult to find the information they need to fill out their audit report. And so as a result of that, they really can lean in on it. The ones that want to be aggressive and the ones that want to exert dominance, they are in a much better position to do that when they recognize you as the auditee don't know everything about what's going on. As a quick anecdote, I always use the example of being stopped by the police. And even though I say the auditors are not really police officers, where there is some similarity, if you are driving down the road and you are pulled over for speeding, or you're pulled over for any reason while you're driving in a car by a police officer, the person in the car, you in the car, being pulled over, are inevitably going to be thinking about, well, what am I going to say? I was an emergency. I don't want to say that. I was confused. The person in front of me was going even faster. And you work through all of the things that you are going to say to that police officer in the hopes of not being penalized, not getting a speeding ticket, not having your license revoked, whatever. And it is all a matter of trying to think through what you're going to tell that police officer. That is how everybody that is stopped by the police, more or less, give or take, deals with it. But people don't think about what that police officer is thinking about, which is, another one of these stops. And they may be doing dozens of them a day. And they have heard every excuse in the book. They're not interested in what you have to say about why this has occurred. This is just a normal run-of-the-mill event for them. What a police officer does when they approach your car is they look for signs that something is out of order beyond whatever it is that they're doing. So the police officer has already decided if you're getting a ticket or not, most likely. I mean, unless you want to open up a mouth, you can turn a borderline situation into a difficult situation for sure. But that person has already made their decision up, and it's based on what their needs are for their job. And that is where the auditor is most like that. When an auditor comes into your facility, they probably are going to decide whether you're passing or not long before the audit starts, or at least early on in the walkthrough. Because they're going to take a look at what they have to see out there. If you're a well-run facility, if you as the person being audited know what you're doing, the auditor, are not going to get in trouble for how the audit goes. They're going to be able, you're giving them permission to give you that certificate. And again, with a cheat sheet, with an ERP system, with your records lined up, you're in a position to really narrow down the risks of that audit. And I end up telling most of my clients, I mean, all the ones that are working hard, I know Rachel is here, she was one of the best. When you prepare for the audit, they tend to go pretty smoothly. You can bring the temperature down, and you can get to a place where it's easier to master those audits. Still a ton of work, still thousands of hours or 1,000 hours or so to get ready for that audit throughout a year. But when it comes time to that audit and you're not having a really difficult time, then the entire process goes much smoother.